The desert sun beat down on the land of enchantment, casting long shadows across a landscape steeped in history. But in the heart of this ancient land, a new chapter was being written, one that challenged the very notion of borders and belonging. In 2025, New Mexico took a defiant stand against the rising tide of federal immigration restrictions, enacting a series of bold laws that transformed the state into a sanctuary for immigrants. These laws, born out of a deep commitment to social justice and human dignity, sent a powerful message to the nation that New Mexico would not stand idly by while its immigrant communities were torn apart. This legislative rebellion was not merely a symbolic act of defiance. It was a calculated response to the increasingly draconian immigration policies emanating from Washington. The federal government, under mounting pressure to curb undocumented immigration, had implemented a series of measures that struck at the heart of immigrant communities. Expedited deportations, often carried out with little regard for due process, had become the norm, spreading fear and uncertainty among immigrant families. The border, once a porous membrane connecting families and cultures, had transformed into a militarized zone, patrolled by an army of agents and surveillance technology. New Mexico, with its long history of welcoming immigrants, refused to be complicit in this assault on human rights. The state legislature, spurred by the tireless advocacy of immigrant rights organizations and community leaders, recognized the urgent need to create a firewall of protection for its most vulnerable residents. These laws, representing a bold departure from the federal government's punitive approach, were designed to ensure that New Mexico remained a place where immigrants could live with dignity and respect, free from the constant threat of detention and deportation. The decision to enact these laws was not without its critics. Opponents argued that they would transform New Mexico into a magnet for undocumented immigrants, straining state resources and encouraging lawlessness. However, supporters countered that these laws were not about defying the rule of law, but about upholding the fundamental human rights of all people, regardless of their immigration status. They argued that by creating a more welcoming and inclusive environment for immigrants, New Mexico was not only living up to its values, but also strengthening its social fabric and economic well-being. At the heart of New Mexico's groundbreaking immigration legislation lay a simple yet profound principle: that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their immigration status. To translate this principle into tangible action, the state enacted a series of laws aimed at dismantling the infrastructure of fear and oppression that had come to define the lives of many immigrants. These laws, meticulously crafted to withstand legal challenges and close loopholes exploited by federal agencies, represented a significant departure from the status quo, effectively creating a parallel system of justice that prioritized human rights over blind enforcement. One of the most consequential provisions of these laws was the outright prohibition of private detention centers within the state's borders. These facilities, run by for-profit corporations with a vested interest in maximizing profits, had become notorious for their inhumane conditions and egregious human rights abuses. By banning these centers, New Mexico sent a clear message that it would not tolerate the exploitation of vulnerable populations for financial gain. This ban, coupled with a strict prohibition on the use of any state or local government facilities for immigration detention purposes, effectively severed the state's ties with the federal government's vast detention network. Recognizing that cooperation with federal immigration authorities often served as a pipeline to detention and deportation, New Mexico enacted strict limitations on such collaboration. State and local law enforcement agencies were prohibited from inquiring about an individual's immigration status during routine interactions, such as traffic stops or arrests for minor offenses. This measure, designed to prevent the criminalization of everyday life for undocumented immigrants, ensured that individuals could interact with law enforcement without fear of being swept up into the deportation dragnet. Furthermore, the sharing of information between state agencies and federal immigration authorities was severely restricted, preventing the use of state resources to facilitate deportations. Beyond these core provisions, New Mexico's 2025 immigration laws included a range of measures aimed at protecting and empowering immigrant communities. Access to legal representation for those facing deportation was expanded, ensuring that individuals could navigate the complex legal system with the assistance of qualified attorneys. A state-level oversight committee was established to monitor detention practices and investigate allegations of abuse, providing a much-needed layer of accountability. The passage of New Mexico's landmark immigration laws in 2025 was not the result of a top-down decree by benevolent lawmakers. It was the culmination of years of tireless grassroots organizing and advocacy by immigrant rights groups, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. These individuals, many of them immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants, understood firsthand the human cost of draconian immigration policies and recognized the urgent need for change. Through their unwavering commitment to justice, they built a powerful movement that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers, uniting communities across the state in a shared fight for human dignity. At the forefront of this movement were immigrant rights organizations, seasoned veterans of countless battles for social justice. These organizations, armed with a deep understanding of immigration law and a passionate commitment to their communities, played a critical role in shaping the legislative agenda. They meticulously documented the human cost of federal immigration policies, collecting heart-wrenching stories of families torn apart and individuals denied basic human rights. They organized rallies, protests, and press conferences, ensuring that the voices of immigrants were heard in the halls of power. And they worked tirelessly behind the scenes, lobbying lawmakers, drafting legislation, and mobilizing public support for their cause. But the fight for immigrant rights in New Mexico was not confined to the sterile halls of the state capitol. It unfolded in churches and community centers, in classrooms and living rooms, in the streets and plazas of towns and cities across the state. Community leaders, recognizing the power of collective action, organized Know Your Rights workshops, legal clinics, and sanctuary spaces where immigrants could find refuge from the constant threat of deportation. They mobilized their congregations, their students, their neighbors, urging them to contact their elected officials to make their voices heard, to demand justice for their communities. This grassroots mobilization was fueled by a deep sense of empathy and solidarity. Many New Mexicans, recognizing the contributions of immigrants to their communities, felt a moral obligation to stand up for their neighbors, friends, and colleagues. They understood that an attack on one group was an attack on all, and they refused to be bystanders in the face of injustice. This spirit of solidarity transcended political affiliations and socioeconomic backgrounds, uniting people from all walks of life in a common cause. As the desert sun rose each morning, casting its golden glow across the mesas and arroyos of New Mexico, a palpable sense of hope and defiance filled the air. The state's bold immigration laws, enacted in the face of fierce opposition from the federal government, had ushered in a new era for immigrants, one marked by a sense of safety, belonging, and empowerment. The impact of these laws was felt in countless ways, from the bustling streets of Albuquerque to the quiet villages dotting the Rio Grande Valley. Families, once living in the shadows of fear, could now breathe a collective sigh of relief, knowing that their loved ones were less likely to be torn away from them. The most immediate and tangible impact of the laws was a significant reduction in the number of immigrants detained and deported from New Mexico, with private detention centers shuttered and state and local law enforcement agencies prohibited from collaborating with federal immigration authorities. The pipeline to deportation had been effectively dismantled. This newfound sense of security allowed immigrants to live, work, and raise their families without the constant fear of being apprehended and separated from their loved ones. Children, no longer haunted by the prospect of returning home from school to find an empty house, could focus on their studies and dream of a brighter future. The economic benefits of these laws were equally profound. Immigrants, no longer relegated to the margins of society, were able to participate more fully in the workforce, contributing their skills and talents to the state's economy. Businesses, no longer fearful of losing valuable employees to deportation, could invest in their workforce with greater confidence. And the state as a whole benefited from a more vibrant and diverse economy, fueled by the contributions of all its residents. The laws, once portrayed by opponents as a threat to New Mexico's economic well-being, had proven to be an engine of growth and prosperity. New Mexico's defiance of federal immigration policy sent shockwaves across the nation, inspiring other states and localities to consider similar measures. The message was clear. that states did not have to be passive bystanders in the face of unjust federal policies. They could choose to resist, to protect their residents, and to uphold their values. This wave of state-level resistance, fueled by a growing recognition of the human cost of mass deportation, represented a significant challenge to the federal government's authority on immigration.